If she's ignoring you, the worst thing you can do is try harder. Texting more, explaining yourself, asking what went wrong, trying to get her attention back. That instinct feels logical, but psychologically it does the exact opposite of what you want. Because ignoring is not rejection. Ignoring is a response, and every response has a trigger. Most men misunderstand why women ignore them. They assume it means she's not interested, or she found someone better, or they said the wrong thing. Sometimes that's true, but most of the time something else is happening. She is emotionally overloaded. And when a woman feels emotional pressure, her instinct is not to confront it, it's to withdraw from it. Ignoring is not about you being invisible, it's about you being emotionally loud without realizing it. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Women don't ignore men who are calm and grounded. They ignore men who are emotionally leaning toward them, even if that leaning is subtle. Even if you think you're being respectful. If she feels that you're waiting on her reaction, her nervous system reads it as pressure. And pressure makes people pull away. This is where most men make the fatal mistake. They try to fix the silence, but silence is not the problem. Your emotional positioning is. The man who triggers a response is never chasing one. He is not trying to pull her back. He removes the reason she pulled away in the first place, and that reason is emotional imbalance. When you're emotionally ahead of her, she feels chased. When you are emotionally behind her, she feels burdened. But when you are emotionally centered, something interesting happens. She becomes curious. Curiosity is the opposite of ignoring. Here's something almost no one tells you. Ignoring is often a test of emotional stability, not a conscious test, an instinctive one. She is unconsciously asking a question. Is this man going to collapse emotionally when I pull back, or is he still grounded without me? Most men fail this test immediately. They double text, they over-explain, they seek reassurance, they ask for clarity, and in doing so, they answer the question, yes, I need you to feel okay. Once she feels that, attraction doesn't just pause, it drains. Because women are not attracted to men who need emotional regulation from them. They're attracted to men who regulate themselves. This is why trying to trigger a response with words almost never works. No message can override emotional imbalance. What actually triggers her response is absence of pressure. Not silence as a tactic, not disappearing as a game, but genuine emotional detachment from the outcome. That is rare, and rarity is noticed. When a man stops trying to be seen, he becomes visible. When he stops needing validation, curiosity turns on. Here's the psychological mechanism behind it. Human attention is drawn to what feels unresolved but safe. If you feel heavy, needy, or emotionally urgent, the mind avoids you. If you feel calm, self-contained, and non-demanding, the mind moves toward you. This is why women often return to men who didn't chase when they were ignored. Not because those men were manipulative, but because they didn't add pressure to the situation. They allowed emotional space, and space gives her mind room to wander. Most men panic when they're ignored because they interpret silence as loss. But silence is often processing, and processing requires safety. The man who triggers the response understands this. He doesn't rush her internal process. He doesn't interrupt it with emotional noise. He stays centered, and that centeredness becomes the loudest signal in the room. Another thing most men don't realize is this. Ignoring is not always about disinterest. Sometimes it's about loss of polarity. If you became too available, too predictable, too emotionally exposed, attraction flattened, and flattening leads to disengagement. The way you restore polarity is not by pushing, it's by pulling yourself back internally, not away from her, back into yourself. When you stop orienting your emotional state around her responses, the dynamic shifts. She is no longer being leaned on emotionally. She is no longer being asked to regulate you. And suddenly, she can feel again. This is where the response comes from. Not from words, from relief. Relief that you are not dependent on her attention. Relief that you are emotionally self-sufficient. Relief that interaction with you feels light instead of heavy. This relief often shows up as curiosity, and curiosity is what makes her reach out. This is the first thing you must internalize. You cannot trigger a response by trying to be responded to. You trigger a response by removing the emotional reason she stopped responding. And that reason is almost always pressure, even if unintentional. Once you remove that pressure, everything changes. Not instantly, not magically, but psychologically. And psychology always works quietly before it works visibly. This is where the shift begins. Not by doing more, but by doing less internally. And when that shift happens, the dynamic starts moving in your favor again. Without chasing, without explaining, without forcing anything. Now let's go deeper into what actually happens inside her when she starts ignoring you, because this is where most men completely misread the situation. Ignoring is rarely about a lack of interest. It's about emotional saturation. When a woman feels that too much emotional weight is being placed on her attention, her nervous system looks for relief. And the fastest form of relief is distance. Distance lowers stimulation. Distance reduces pressure. Distance gives her space to breathe. Most men mistake this distance as a problem to solve, so they add more input, more messages, more explanations, more emotional availability. And without realizing it, they become the source of the pressure she's trying to escape. Here's the key psychological truth. Attraction doesn't disappear when a woman pulls back, it goes quiet. And quiet attraction behaves very differently from loud attraction. Loud attraction wants interaction, quiet attraction wants space to process. If you interrupt that processing, attraction doesn't get stronger, it shuts down. This is why the men who do nothing often get a response, while the men who try everything get ignored longer. Doing nothing externally is not the point. What matters is what you stop doing internally. You stop monitoring, you stop waiting, you stop tying your emotional state to her responses. That internal shift changes the emotional signal you're sending. Instead of urgency, you project neutrality. Instead of need, you project self-sufficiency. And self-sufficiency is deeply attractive. Another thing that's rarely explained is how women experience emotional pressure differently from men. Men tend to experience pressure as motivation. Women experience pressure as constraint. Constraint kills desire. When she feels that responding to you will require emotional effort, reassurance, or responsibility, her mind avoids it. Not because she dislikes you, but because avoidance protects her emotional energy. This is why a response suddenly appears when you stop trying to fix things, because the emotional cost of engaging with you drops. Another important truth is this: women respond more to emotional contrast than to consistency of effort. If you are constantly present and suddenly become internally absent, the contrast is felt. Not as punishment, not as tactic, but as a shift in emotional gravity. Gravity draws attention. This is why emotional withdrawal that comes from self-centering, not manipulation, often triggers curiosity. She begins to wonder. Did something change? Did he move on? Did he stop caring? That wondering is not about losing you. It's about reassessing you. Reassessment often brings attraction back to the surface. Most men never allow reassessment because they stay emotionally available at all times. Availability removes contrast. Contrast removes invisibility. Another subtle mechanism is this. When you stop reacting to being ignored, you pass a critical emotional test. You demonstrate that silence does not destabilize you. That stability answers a question she was unconsciously asking. Is this man strong enough emotionally to handle uncertainty? When the answer becomes yes, attraction has room to return. This is also why passive aggression never works. Posting indirectly, changing behavior to provoke jealousy, sending cold messages to get a reaction. Those behaviors are still reactions, and reactions signal emotional dependence. The response you want is not triggered by reaction, it's triggered by non-attachment. Non-attachment does not mean you don't care. It means your sense of self is not dependent on immediate feedback. That independence is rare, and rarity draws attention. Another truth most men overlook is that women often ignore men to regain control of the emotional pace. If things moved too fast, if emotions escalated too quickly, if expectations started forming, pulling back slows everything down. A man who understands this does not fight the slowdown. He allows it, and by allowing it, he shows emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is attractive because it reduces friction. This is why women often return to men who handle being ignored with calm, not because they were rewarded, but because they felt safe to re-engage. Safety is the gateway to communication. Here's the paradox. The less you try to be heard, the more likely you are to be listened to. The less you demand clarity, the more clarity emerges. The less you chase a response, the more likely a response appears. Because the emotional environment has changed. It's no longer heavy. It's no longer demanding. It's open. And open environments invite movement. Most men never experience this because they don't trust silence. They treat silence as a threat. But silence is only a threat when you need something from it. When you don't, silence becomes neutral. And neutrality is powerful. This is the internal state that begins to reverse the dynamic. Not instantly, but inevitably. Because when pressure disappears, curiosity has room to exist again. And curiosity is what brings her back into contact. Not because you asked, but because she felt the pull. And that pull was created the moment you stopped pushing emotionally. This is how the response begins forming. Quietly, internally, before any message is sent. And once that internal shift happens, the external response often follows on its own. Now, let's talk about the moment where most men unknowingly lock themselves out of ever getting a response. They confuse patience with waiting. Waiting is still attachment. If you are checking your phone, replaying the last message, wondering when she'll reply, measuring time, you are still emotionally engaged with the outcome. And emotionally, she can feel that. Even without contact, this is one of the least understood parts of human psychology. Emotional attention travels. When someone is the center of your emotional focus, the dynamic tilts. She becomes the one being leaned on, you become the one leaning. And leaning is felt as pressure. The response you want is not triggered when you wait calmly. It's triggered when you reclaim your emotional center. This is the shift that changes everything. You stop positioning her as the source of movement in your life. Your attention moves back to yourself. Not as an act, not as revenge, not as indifference, but as reality. When that happens, the emotional weight lifts. Here's what most men don't realize. When a woman ignores you, she is still aware of you. Ignoring is not forgetting. Ignoring is avoiding emotional stimulation. And the moment you stop stimulating her emotionally through pressure, something unexpected happens. Her mind becomes free to revisit you, without resistance, without defense. This is when memory activates. She starts remembering how she felt around you. Not what you said, not what you did, but the emotional atmosphere. If that atmosphere was calm, grounded, and non-demanding, attraction quietly resurfaces. If it was tense, needy, or urgent, it doesn't. This is why reactions after being ignored matter more than everything that came before. Your response to silence becomes your loudest signal. Most men respond by trying to reinsert themselves. The man who triggers a response does the opposite. He lets the silence exist without emotional charge. Not because he's hoping it will work, but because he is no longer orienting his emotional state around her behavior. This sends a powerful subconscious message. "I'm okay without you responding." And that message changes how she experiences you. Another critical shift happens here. When you stop emotionally monitoring her, she begins monitoring you. Not consciously, instinctively. She wonders why the pressure disappeared. She wonders what changed. She wonders if you moved on emotionally. And that wondering is not fear, it's curiosity. Curiosity is the seed of engagement. Most men never allow curiosity to form because they keep filling the space with emotional noise. Another subtle detail most men miss is how women respond to emotional dignity. A man who handles being ignored without resentment, passive aggression, or collapse communicates strength. Strength here is not dominance, it's self-respect. Self-respect makes engagement feel safe because it tells her she won't be punished emotionally for reconnecting. No guilt, no pressure, no obligation, just openness. This is why many women reappear with casual messages, not dramatic apologies, not emotional explanations, simple contact, because the environment feels clean again. Another important point is this: trying to appear busy does nothing. Trying to appear unbothered does nothing. Trying to create jealousy does nothing, because those are still strategies, and strategies leak intention. What works is not pretending you don't care. What works is not needing the outcome to feel centered. There is a big difference. One is performance. The other is inner alignment. Women respond to alignment, not behavior. This is also why some men get a response weeks later without doing anything. Not because of time, but because emotional attachment dissolved. Once attachment dissolves, attraction has room to breathe again. Another thing most men don't understand is that attraction cannot exist alongside obligation. If responding to you feels like a task, she avoids it. If responding feels like a choice, she considers it. The man who triggers a response removes obligation from the interaction. He does not make silence heavy. He does not make her feel guilty. He does not make himself small. He simply remains intact. This integrity is felt, and it changes the emotional tone. Another critical mistake men make is trying to time their re-entry, sending a perfectly calculated message, waiting the perfect number of days, crafting the perfect line. Timing does not matter if emotional pressure is still present, and timing becomes relevant once pressure is gone. Because once pressure is gone, any contact feels lighter, and lightness invites response. Here's the deeper truth. You don't trigger her response. You stop blocking it. Her response was never locked behind the right words. It was blocked by emotional imbalance. Once balance returns, the response becomes possible again. Not guaranteed, but possible. And possibility is all attraction ever needs. This is why men who truly let go often hear from women unexpectedly, not because they waited long enough, but because they stopped leaning emotionally. The moment you stop trying to be chosen, you become visible again. And visibility is what opens the door to response. This is the internal shift that separates men who stay ignored from men who quietly re-enter her awareness. Not through force, but through absence of pressure. And once that absence is felt, the dynamic no longer feels stuck. It begins to move on its own. There is another layer to this that most men never notice, and it explains why some women suddenly respond after long silence as if nothing happened. Emotional pressure fades faster than emotional memory. When pressure disappears, memory comes back online, and memory is where attraction lives. This is why trying to remind her of yourself never works. Messages that say just checking in, or hope you're doing well, or did I do something wrong? Those don't trigger a response. They reintroduce pressure. They pull her back into the emotional weight she stepped away from. The man who triggers a response does not reintroduce weight. He remains emotionally light. Another mistake men make is trying to reassert value. Posting to look impressive, talking louder in shared spaces, trying to be seen. That is still seeking reaction, and seeking reaction keeps the dynamic inverted. The response you want only happens when you are no longer trying to restore your position, because the moment you stop trying to restore it, you naturally regain it. Here's what happens internally on her side. When you stop emotionally leaning, she no longer feels like the emotional regulator. Her nervous system exits defense mode, and once defense drops, curiosity has room to surface. Curiosity doesn't ask permission, it simply moves. She might wonder what you're doing. She might wonder if you moved on. She might wonder why she doesn't feel pressure anymore. That wondering is not accidental. It is the beginning of engagement. Most men interrupt this stage because they get impatient. They want certainty. They want closure. They want confirmation that it worked. But curiosity collapses the moment certainty is demanded. This is why the response, when it comes, often feels casual. A simple message, a neutral check-in, an unrelated question. And this is where many men lose everything again. They mistake the response as a green light to rush. They flood energy back in. They over-explain. They try to restart where things left off. And the cycle repeats. The man who actually triggers lasting engagement understands something critical. The response is not the reward. The response is a temperature check. She is testing whether the emotional pressure is truly gone, whether the environment is still safe, whether engaging will cost her energy again. If you respond to her response with urgency, she withdraws again. If you respond with calm presence, the door stays open. This is why triggering a response is not about the message you send. It's about the emotional state you hold when it arrives. Another important detail is how you handle delayed responses after she reappears. Most men immediately adjust their pace to match hers. They wait by the phone. They reply instantly. They show relief. Relief signals attachment. Attachment recreates pressure. Pressure recreates withdrawal. The man who changes the dynamic does not show relief, not because it's cold, but because nothing was lost internally. He responds naturally, without urgency, without emotional spike. This tells her that reconnecting does not place emotional weight back on her, and that makes continued interaction feel safe. Another thing most men miss is that women are not afraid of men losing interest. They are afraid of men needing interest. A man who can enjoy connection without clinging to it feels emotionally strong. Strength invites engagement. Need repels it. This is why the internal work matters more than external timing. If you are still attached to outcome, any contact will leak it. If you are not, even silence feels neutral, and neutrality is attractive. Another deep psychological mechanism at play here is autonomy. Women protect autonomy fiercely. Anything that threatens it is avoided. When a man's emotional state depends on her behavior, autonomy is threatened. When a man remains autonomous regardless of her actions, attraction has room to breathe. This is why the response you want never comes from control. It comes from release. Release of pressure, release of expectation, release of emotional dependence. Most men never experience this shift because they believe attraction must be maintained through effort. But attraction is maintained through non-interference. Once it exists, your job is not to manage it, it's to stop suffocating it. This is why silence handled correctly is not passive, it is active self-regulation. It is choosing not to react emotionally. It is choosing dignity over reassurance. And dignity is deeply magnetic. Another deep psychological mechanism at play here is autonomy. Women protect autonomy fiercely. Anything that threatens it is avoided. When a man's emotional state depends on her behavior, autonomy is threatened. When a man remains autonomous regardless of her actions, attraction has room to breathe. This is why the response you want never comes from control. It comes from release. Release of pressure, release of expectation, release of emotional dependence. Most men never experience this shift because they believe attraction must be maintained through effort, but attraction is maintained through non-interference. Once it exists, your job is not to manage it, it's to stop suffocating it. This is why silence handled correctly is not passive, it is active self-regulation. It is choosing not to react emotionally. It is choosing dignity over reassurance. And dignity is deeply magnetic. Another important truth is this: even if she never responds, this shift still matters. Because the man who can handle being ignored without collapsing is not just more attractive to her, he becomes more attractive to everyone. Because emotional self-sufficiency radiates outward. It changes how you move, how you speak, how you engage. And that change does not go unnoticed. This is why focusing on triggering response is the wrong goal. The right goal is becoming the man who does not need one. When you reach that state, responses happen more often than not because you demanded them, but because the emotional environment invited them. And when engagement resumes from that place, it no longer feels fragile. It feels grounded, and grounded dynamics don't collapse easily. They grow quietly, without force, without chasing, without explanation. This is the state where ignoring no longer feels threatening, because you are no longer trying to be chosen. You are simply present, and presence is always felt. At this point, you should see the pattern clearly. The response you wanted was never blocked by timing, distance, or the wrong words. It was blocked by emotional pressure. And emotional pressure is not removed by doing something clever. It is removed by letting go internally. This is the part most men resist, because letting go feels like losing control. But control was never what created attraction in the first place. Presence did. When you stop orienting your emotional state around whether she responds, something fundamental changes. Your attention comes back to yourself. Your energy settles. Your nervous system stabilizes, and that stability is felt, even without contact. This is why the strongest signal you can send when she's ignoring you is not a message. It's emotional independence. Independence tells her nervous system that engaging with you does not come with responsibility, guilt, or pressure. It feels light. Lightness invites movement. This is also why women often reach out unexpectedly, casually, and without explanation. Not because they plan to, but because the internal resistance disappeared. Once resistance is gone, contact becomes easy. Another important truth is this: when she does respond, the dynamic is fragile only if you make it so. The moment you treat the response as validation, you reintroduce pressure. The moment you treat it as normal, you preserve balance. The man who actually keeps the door open does not celebrate internally. He does not rush. He does not try to make up for lost time. He stays exactly where he was emotionally before she reached out, centered. This consistency tells her that responding does not put her back in a position of emotional labor. And that makes continued engagement feel safe. Another thing most men misunderstand is that this process is not about winning her back. It's about restoring emotional polarity. When polarity returns, attraction can move again. Without polarity, everything stalls. Polarity is not dominance. It is the space between two emotionally independent people. That space allows desire to exist. Another powerful shift happens here. Once you stop needing a response, silence stops feeling personal. It becomes neutral. And neutrality dissolves anxiety. When anxiety dissolves, your behavior naturally changes. You stop monitoring. You stop calculating. You stop rehearsing. You simply live. And that authenticity is what women respond to most. Even if she never responds, this shift changes your trajectory. Because the man who can remain grounded under uncertainty is not just more attractive, he is more free. Freedom is felt in every interaction, It changes how you show up everywhere. This is why learning to handle being ignored correctly is not about her. It's about you. It's about becoming someone whose emotional center is internal, not outsourced. Once you reach that state, ignoring loses its power over you. And when something loses power over you, it often returns in a different form. Not always, but often. Because attraction does not move toward need, it moves toward stability, and stability is rare. Now, if this video helped you understand why ignoring happens and how emotional pressure silently blocks attraction, there's one video you should watch next. In this video, we focused on removing pressure, restoring balance, and triggering a response without chasing. But there is a deeper layer that explains why women imagine certain men, think about them privately, and feel drawn to them even without contact. That's exactly what I break down in my video called How to Become the Man She Secretly Fantasizes About. That video shows how emotional grounding, restraint, and presence create desire at a subconscious level before any message is ever sent. Watch that next, because when you understand both silence and fantasy, attraction stops feeling random. It becomes something you no longer have to chase. And when you stop chasing, everything changes.